as an artist, I am a musician. Am I comfortable with that? Um, I think I'm pretty comfortable with it. For me, music isn't in a vacuum, you know? Um, music isn't, for me, really about music. Sometimes it's about music making, which for me is about a real social interaction between a musician and a listener, or between musicians themselves. Um, so I think a lot about that, no matter what I'm making. What is what is it about the relationship and the social circumstances, um, of the interaction, and what am I trying to do with it? What ideas and types of interactions are served best by more motivic concepts? What is served better by melodic concepts? What is served better by textural concepts? Pitched versus non-pitched. The degree of so-called, I don't like this phrase, but the degree of so-called freedom. Um, and I don't, all music is freedom, but what I mean is, the performer's uh, input into how important is that in the relationship that I'm trying to develop between the listener and the music and the musicians. My parents met at art school in Brooklyn, and my father was an architect, and my mother was a creative person in many different directions. So I grew up in a household that uh, fostered creativity. There was always access to creative materials for visual art, um, and for instruments. As I became interested in them, they were always available, and also, um, we were like one of the first families that had a video camera, a VHS camera. So we would make, my siblings and I would make home movies, and so there was always creative time was a big, it was a big part of my childhood. But my parents were not musicians, but they loved music. And I remember a few things early on that sort of drew me to identifying as a musician. I mean, I had violin lessons when I was 3. There was a piano in the house by the time I was 6. No lessons for piano, but just it was there. Um, at some point, we had a used drum set in the house. I started saxophone lessons at school when I was 9 years old. And I remember uh, I was very affected by the score, uh, the film score by a composer named Basil Polydoros, for a sort of early Arnold Schwarzenegger film called Conan the Barbarian. But the film score was modeled on Carmina Burana of Karl Orff, and it really affected me. And my first attempts to compose were sort of sitting at the piano composing in this sort of pseudo archaic style. Um, and when I was 9 years old, I first saw the movie Amadeus. I saw that movie, and I was really drawn to this, the idea of like the classical, the big name composer. You know, um, I always reacted strongly to the music in the cartoons that I was watching um, as a kid. And then by the time I was 14 in high school, it was sealed, my identity as a musician. It has always served me very well to be very clear about who who I am and what I want to do in the world. Um, Not to say that I've never had doubts, but it was useful to me to know early on, I'm a musician. I'm going to make music. I'm going to spend all of my time, that I don't have to be doing other things like, you know other work for school. Uh, really involved in music, uh, whether I'm playing, performing music or composing or listening, um, going to concerts. I think I really early on was very determined about what I wanted to be and what I was passionate about. I didn't leave high school and go on to my studies feeling ambivalent about studying something in university so I could get a job or something. Um, and that had its challenges. Uh, Adults in my life would say, "Well, how are you going to make money?" And I was really determined to not answer that question. That was that was later. How am I going to learn to do these things that are really important to me, uh, really meaningful to me? That was more important. I think the way that I approach my work, number one, I've been doing it long enough that it has changed over the course of my life, but also, and it changes depending on what I'm working on, and it changes on the piece itself. When I have like motivic phrases in my work, like a repeated phrase or a rhythmic phrase, um, it I almost always come up with it when I take walks. Sometimes when I'm driving, when I'm moving, you know, and which is different from how I come up with works, like the piece that I wrote for Modelo that's made up more of a texture, which is more about looking at the way an instrument is played, or the way music looks on the page, and playing with it to create a texture out of that. My life is chaos. My life is chaos, and my working life is chaos. And for that reason, there's no I don't think there's a real pattern across uh my output, um or even in like a given year. If I think if I wrote 10 pieces for Modelo, there would be 10 different approaches depending on the time of year that I'm writing, depending on what's going on in the world, what's going on in my life, what the piece that I'm writing is about, and how that makes me feel. Um, for example, the elegy that I wrote for Modelo had to be written fast. It was burning. And some pieces are burning. Some pieces are. I've had this idea for 10 years, and I'm finally ready to uh, lock it into a form, or something like that. Um, yeah, there's no pattern for me. The chaos is, maybe in some ways it is a an asset, um, to getting around blocks, but it's also a weakness, for sure. Um, it's almost like reinventing the wheel every time I write a piece, in a way. Um, how do you write a piece? Like, how do you like where do you start? Wh- How do you know it's done? How long does it take to write a piece? I have no idea how long it takes to write. Like, I think some of my peers, and I admire this, they really have a sense of themselves that, if I'm going to write 10 minutes of music for 5 instruments, it's going to take me about this long. And therefore I know what I'm worth in terms of actually, like, what kind of like commission fee I would need or something like that. For me, it's like, I don't know. Sometimes I can write a piece that's half an hour long and it takes me an afternoon to come up with the idea, and that's it. And sometimes it's like, oh man, if you wanted me to write like 3 minutes for a string trio and it just has to like have beautiful harmony, I'm gonna like just like worry over how one chord moves to the next. It could be for weeks. I think I mean another block for me is and has always been the state of the world. And even though I feel very clear in my position in the world as uh as a musician, um with some my 20s, there were moments where I was like, is this really what I should be doing in the world? um I still feel occasionally like, yes, of course I'm a musician in the world, but I need to put some I need to put my energy into something else. Or yes, I'm a musician and this is what this musician is doing right now, and it's not making music in a very conventional sense, but it's in engaging the world from a musician's perspective, with whatever, with my heart, my spirit, my intellect, but it doesn't necessarily result in notes on a page or something like that. And other times the state of the world, and I realize that's a very broad, we could get more specific, but we also don't have hours and hours to talk. um but sometimes the state of the world is like the fire that makes a piece of music, whether it's a recording or a performance or a composition, happen. Because I understand that my response needs to be in the form of this way of humans or socially organizing, where we are making and listening to music together. I don't think that I'm the kind of person who needs to go into a library and research a bunch of stuff to become inspired. I talked about the state of the world a moment ago. And if you're someone who is like deeply affected by the state of the world, and it you're wrestling with it all the time, the good news is there's always inspiration there. There's always a way to engage the world. There's so many ways to fight back, right? I remember this, I think it was the composer Lutosławski, Polish composer Lutosławski, who was like a very big influence for me, like a technical inspiration, um, especially in my 20s, who said, I think it was him, who said like a composer is always working on the same piece across their career. And like some people might say like a novelist is always writing the same book, you know. And I think to some extent that's true for me. There's no piece that's gonna fix it. I'm not gonna fix it with a piece of music or a performance, but we're gonna fucking try over and over again. I mean, I don't know what else to do. I have I will tell you that, there's like some heads behind me, um and I keep above my desk a picture of Alice Coltrane. Over there I have a picture of Charlie Parker. Um Over there I have a poster of my band Irreversible Entanglements, and the four other musicians in that band are constantly inspiring me as we play together. And you know it, living in it, I guess. One night at the end of December 2009, US Special Forces descended on a little village called Ghazi Khan in Kandahar province in Afghanistan and uh, murdered 9 people. 8 of them were students, and one of them was a teacher. Uh, some of them were handcuffed to their beds. Um, some of them were shot in the back of the head. I wrote the piece immediately following learning about this. It's not widely reported. As far as I know, there's been no accountability for this from any of the people who did this to those children, uh, any of the people who gave the orders, all the way up the chain of command. So I guess the piece is about what happened, but it's also, I think at the time I talked about it as like a kind of a monument in sound to what happened. I think they should just have like some dignity. I've said this elsewhere in other contexts, but I think art is not necessarily about facts, but it's about truth. And there's not much that needs to be said. So there's not much that needs to be written. And this seemed like a way to get an ensemble, doesn't matter what instruments, and it almost doesn't matter what the technical proficiency is of each of the musicians, but a way for us to breathe together, by uh to, together, um in common, because it's not together, it's not, as you know, it's not coordinated breathing, but it's everything happens at the duration of a breath, right, or a bow. um so everything, the durations are very organic and self-determined, um and the harmony evolves based on the outpouring and intaking of breath. I think a lot of detail wasn't called for. It was more important to me at the time to sear in this memory. This, on the one hand, just to acknowledge that it happened, where it's hard to find information about it, is to shame the people responsible, and at the same time to, like I said, to offer dignity to the people who were killed there, and then by extension all of the people who suffer that kind of racist imperial violence. You think about all of the suffering that was brought to people in Afghanistan in that war, that was the longest war the US has fought. I mean, it wasn't a fight, please. And just like, to pick 9 people, it wasn't, it's not like that, it's not an intellectual process, right? Like I said before, I don't have to go into a library to find some kind of inspiration. I heard about it, I wrote a piece. you know I could hear about another massacre that happens and feel so overwhelmed, I don't write a piece. In fact, I do hear about other massacres all the time. We all do. The scale, when you think that this was 9 kids, then you think about the scale, like this, what does that mean? And I, I came up with what, like a tiny little piece, a page of notes. I don't have to say this out loud, and yet I feel like I have an obligation to say this out loud. That in the time it's taken me to describe these feelings about writing this little piece for these 9 school children who were killed by US Special Forces one night in 2009, the number of children who have died in the violence that's being carried out against the people of Gaza right now is both quantifiable. There's like a number of children who are dying each minute, each hour in Gaza as I speak, but also it's unquantifiable. I think, I hope I don't get this wrong, but I think the 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 writer Orwell said, "Those who forget their history are doomed to repeat it." Right? And I said earlier, like, just keep writing the your piece is never going to fix it. It doesn't mean you don't try. So we try to remember, right? We try to honor uh, those people, whose whose deaths we are complicit in. I pay my fucking taxes, you know. I buy those bullets. I pay for those bullets, right? And yeah, and we keep holding up the picture, in this case the piece, in the faces of people who want to forget, who want to act like it's okay to keep doing it. Uh, you know, for as much as I hope that people get something out of the piece, from hearing the piece, I hope they feel moved. I hope they feel like it creates a space for their own uh, whether it's grief or whether it builds a fire for them, it lights a fire for them. I hope that people who are fine with the status quo, who even support the status quo, which is all this horror, the kind of horror that my piece describes and is inspired by. I hope they are uncomfortable. I hope they don't feel comfortable. I hope they want to leave, and I hope they do leave, and I hope they don't come back. I hope they don't feel welcome anywhere. I want them to not be in our spaces. I want them to uh, lose the welcome at the table of culture and community. And I want them to feel that. And I want people to make a choice to participate in culture and community and healing and justice and accountability in a productive way. And if they can't, I want them to feel isolated. And I want my work to do that. I want them to feel shame. And I think it's very important. We don't we are not going to get anywhere from making work, artistic, intellectual, academic, political work that welcomes everybody. People who are not willing to participate, not willing to treat others with honor and dignity, are not welcome, in my opinion. And I don't want my work to be part of that canon uh, of human achievement that does nothing and asks nothing of people. You know, light classical or light jazz or light, this or that, easygoing, uh, asks nothing of you. I want my work to be an offering to people who need it and to people who earn it. I hope my piece offers something to people uh, that's useful. I So these days, the last couple of years, sort of coming out of the pandemic, I started doing a radio show, broadcast radio show, 2 hours a week. I had never done radio before, but I found a local radio station that would teach me how to use the gear, and then I could come in and play music that I like. And the shows that I've done, since the first week of October, have been really challenging for me. And each week it gets more challenging because I have 2 hours on the air, and the gig is to play music, recorded music for people. It's not to talk. It's not, you know. And what I figured out is to make music, to broadcast music that first of all offers a container to the public for their to process and direct their feelings. You know, maybe this is a role that I can take. It's not easy because I spend hours finding the right music for that. Um, and that means I'm thinking about that, you know? Of course, going back to an earlier question, this is not this is being a musician, yeah, but also it's not making music. It's just broadcasting music, but it's part of having the musician's heart and the musician's mind, I think. But um, the hopeful value of the piece is that again, um, it creates a container for a frame for people to know about this specific thing, um, and to process the feelings connected to that. Yeah, it's not just about never forget, but never forget and feel something, right? It's not facts, it's truth.